this month's speaker is Alexis Glidewell. She's going to be talking about the caregiver side of this process today. Alexis is a licensed clinical social worker. She's got a bachelor's degree and a master's in social work. She began working with older adults and families affected by major neurocognitive disorders over 30 years ago. And she's worked at the Redwood Caregiver Resource Center, which is a really important group for us to know about. If you don't, there's information on the back table. She joined Kaiser Permanente in Santa Rosa in 2017 as a licensed clinical social worker, working on their interdisciplinary team, easy for me to say, interdisciplinary team in geriatric medicine department. And now she's focused primarily on full-time private practice. She brings her expertise in managing particularly challenging dementia-related behaviors and awareness of family systems in the presence of chronic degenerative illnesses. Anybody heard of one? She continues to facilitate support groups and teach workshops for formal and informal caregivers, and to provide clinical supervision to master's level social workers. Alexis is committed to cultivating awareness and concern for the experiences and needs of family caregivers. This is us. Welcome, Alexis. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for having me today. I presented for this group years and years ago, and it's nice to be back. I was asked to talk about issues related to caregivers, and that's really my niche. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about ways to be aware of common caregiver stressors, how caregivers are often affected over time by caring for someone with a chronic degenerative disease, and ways to cope, ways to mitigate some of that risk. So I think this is a really important topic to cover because it often gets pushed to the wayside, often gets dismissed when we're looking at a family system. The health and welfare of the family caregiver is often not the primary focus. So common caregiving challenges that we see are feelings of isolation. Often folks can experience feeling isolated as they're not able to access those activities or relationships that they once were able to do with more facility. Groups like this help mitigate some of that. Look at all of you here together today. The concerns of the caregiver are often dismissed, especially in the earlier stages. Often the primary caregiver is the person who knows the person with the disease best. And so they notice subtle changes and warning signs of change when they're further out on the horizon, before anyone else notices. And so sometimes caregivers can feel like their experience is disenfranchised, their concerns are dismissed by other family members, friends, even healthcare professionals. They may be perceived as the bad guy for this reason. Oh, you're just paranoid. Oh, he's just getting older. Oh, you've always had a thing for dad. They may also be perceived as the bad guy by the person with emerging symptoms. Get off my case. It's not that big of a deal. I'm doing all right. Don't suffocate me. Another challenge is the family history. I say we arrive at the caregiving table as the people we were the day before we became a caregiver, with our relationship to the care recipient as it was the day before, with family dynamics as they were the day before. None of that history goes away because someone got sick. And so this can be complicating. Often caregivers have their own health concerns, and so feeling like they're trying to balance a need to pay attention to their own health and well-being without being perceived as selfish or without feeling selfish themselves can be a challenge. Sometimes their own health concerns get in the way in practical ways of providing the care. The kind of care my loved one needs is not practical for me to provide because of my own health issues. So that can be stressful as well. Often caregivers are juggling multiple responsibilities. This kind of falls under the umbrella of the world doesn't slow down to accommodate illness or caregiving. And so I always remind people that caregivers are doing everything everyone else is doing, plus the caregiving, which would be a full-time job in most cases in a vacuum. And then caregivers are also experiencing what we call ambiguous loss and anticipatory grief. And we'll get into what those are a little bit later. So what's so hard about caregiving, in addition to the list I just went down? Data show that family caregivers are at increased risk for anxiety and depression above their non-caregiving counterparts. They're at increased risk for physical health concerns, either developing physical health issues as a result of protracted stress from caregiving, or having pre-existing health issues exacerbate under the stress of caregiving. And financial concerns. Sometimes we have to retire early, quit work, reduce hours. We've exhausted our family medical leave. And care is expensive. Help is expensive. So planning for the future can feel very stressful on multiple fronts, and especially on a financial front. How much is this going to cost us? What can we afford? And how do we plan within our means? The system is really set up to be patient-focused, and that's not a bad thing. I just think sometimes the system forgets there is more than one patient. So the needs and experiences of family caregivers are often overlooked and under-prioritized, even though we know those risk factors to be true that I just listed in the previous slide. They're often overlooked and under-prioritized by healthcare professionals. They're often overlooked and under-prioritized by friends, neighbors, families. You know, most of the time I'm hearing people calling up and saying, you know, how's Susan? Susan's the person with the diagnosis, and how's George, the caregiver? Not a bad thing. We should be asking how Susan's doing. We should be caring about people who are diagnosed. And we should also not forget that the caregiver is also at risk for negative health and well-being outcomes. So there's two patients. The disease really affects the family. We call it a family systems disease. So I mentioned earlier, nobody's a caregiver in a vacuum. The world does not slow down to accommodate caregiving. And so this can result in clinically what I call role overload. I often hear the term role reversal. There's a role reversal. And I don't think that's really accurate. A role reversal means we're swapping tasks. We're swapping roles. Role overload refers to the caregiver taking on more and more roles to accommodate need. And this is something that can be really insidious. Most of the time we're adapting to little subtle changes all along, and it can kind of have a nickel and diming effect if we're not paying attention. So often people will hit a tipping point because they're adapting and adapting and adapting and adapting, and all of a sudden they're kind of like that frog in the slowly warming water, and they realize, oh my goodness, I'm overloaded. So something to just be aware of as I'm adapting. What is it requiring of me? Again, as I mentioned earlier, history doesn't go away. And sometimes the way that our experience of grief or guilt or resentment is affected by our history in the family, in the community, and also our history with each other, with the person I'm providing care to. So if grief shows up for some caregivers, that might be grief around changes and losses in a lovely, wonderful relationship. For another caregiver, it might be grief and loss around complications related to a relationship that was tricky, and the loss of hope of being able to reconcile a relationship that might have been tricky. Or guilt around not showing up as much as I would like to, even though I know I'm showing up to the limit of my capacity. Or guilt around thoughts that might come up. Boy, I wonder if he'd have done the same for me. Some people find guilt for the opposite reason. I know he would have done the same for me, and he'd have done it in a lovely way, and how terrible of me to have this deep, dark thought. So our history informs how we experience these things. Does that make sense? And then resentment. I often see people get into this guilt-resentment cycle. I feel really guilty because what I'm doing may result in this person whom I love having to endure some discomfort, but it's according to my need. And then I feel resentful for having to feel guilty when all I'm doing is putting my life on hold and putting my needs secondary. So then I feel resentful for the guilt, and then I feel guilt for the resentment. And there's kind of this cycle that tends to happen. That's all really normal. There also might be resentment related to historical relationships. I assume everybody in this room loves and cares about one another, or you wouldn't be here. There's plenty of other places you could be on a Saturday afternoon. And I also know families are complicated, and we can love people and still have complicated histories that play into stressful situations. So, support for the caregiver, knowing all of these things I've listed out, why things tend to be so complicated, why things can be so hard, the multiple layers of changes, how it affects us emotionally and physically, financially, all of those things. What tends to be helpful toward coping is getting some things that we've identified over the years, and a big part of that is the work of Redwood Caregiver Resource Center and the California Caregiver Resource Centers, who since the mid-1980s have been providing services to family caregivers, and also as part of that, doing comprehensive assessments of caregivers and how they are doing. We call it a biopsychosocial evaluation. So they're looking at caregiver bio would be their physical health, They're looking at their psychological health, so emotional, mental health, how the stress is affecting them. And then social, what do they have in terms of support, resources to cope? And so we know statistically what tends to be helpful for caregivers because of those continual assessments over time. We're able to look at statistics. Where are caregivers tending to have more challenge? What themes tend to emerge? And those are the things I've listed. And then what tends to be most helpful over time? And one of the big things is access to information and education to increase understanding of this new context. So all of you coming to groups like this, kudos to you. Getting as much realistic information as you can is so helpful toward setting realistic expectations for yourself, for the person for whom you're providing care, and to also inform realistic planning. How can I plan realistically if I'm not informed about the circumstances and the eventualities that I'm planning for? Does that make sense? So I'm so grateful for groups like this, especially groups that are disease specific, where you can get really good information and education that's vetted. Whoops. This can also help families advocate for needs. When we are more informed, we're able to show up to clinic appointments, we're able to talk to friends and families, we're able to navigate resources in the community and advocate for needs because we understand what is helpful, what's not helpful. We can help a primary care physician. I mean, I'm often reminding caregivers, you're gonna have to educate the doctor on this one. We can help the primary care physician understand, hey, I'm not just being paranoid. This is a well-documented concern and we do need this referral to this specialist. Or hey, this new symptom is very likely a side effect to that medication, so I need to talk with the clinical pharmacist, or I need to talk to the prescribing physician to advocate for monitoring this and seeing if there are adjustments. The more informed we are, the more access we have, the better we can advocate for the needs of all parties. Not just the patient's need, but also the caregiver's need. Hey, I'm starting to notice I'm up to here with my reserves and I really need to ask for some help here. I really need some help delegating, or I need some help with respite, or I need to ask for such and such service that I know exists because I've got access to good information about resources, and that I can give myself permission to ask for it because I've got good access to information and education around what's necessary to cope and mitigate risk. Does that make sense? This access to information and education can also help increase that self-compassion and justify adaptive coping. Every time we have to adapt, this goes for the caregiver, it also goes for the person with the diagnosis. Every time we have to adapt to an unwelcome change, it's simultaneously liberating because we're no longer pushing against the reality of the situation. We can kind of unload that boulder of unrealistic expectation. So it's liberating in that way to be adaptive. And it's grief producing. the reason that I need to adapt is because the old way no longer works, and I wish it did. So when I learn what's realistic and what's not realistic, it's good news, bad news. It's hard to hear. It's hard to come to a group like this. Nobody wants to need this group. And I bet every single person here is grateful for it. So simultaneously liberating and empowering to be adaptive, and it requires grief from us. I have to grieve the loss of the old way working in order to be able to justify the adaptation. And when I recognize that, I can be prompted to be a little more compassionate with myself. No wonder I'm struggling so much to do this thing I know I need to do, or to stop doing that thing I've been told isn't helpful and I know isn't helpful. No wonder I'm struggling with it, because it's my heart's desire for the old way to still be possible. Pivoting and adapting means I'm acknowledging the loss of the old way. So it's kind of like this balance and holding of opposites. When we're better informed about that, having those challenging feelings come up is really normal. The goal is not to not feel the challenge, but to be able to have that challenge come up and more quickly respond with self-compassion and permission to adapt. Another thing that can be really helpful for caregivers is access to supportive services such as respite. These can provide for opportunities for self-care. How many of you have had the experience of having someone like me stand up in front of the room, wag their finger at you and say, you better take good care of yourself, and think, yeah, lady, you show me how, right? Don't you think I would if I could? And feel patronized by the person prescribing self-care to you. I've had people really put me in my place around this one, and I'm grateful for it because it's really informed my sensitivity over the years working with caregivers. Yeah, self-care does need to be a primary focus for caregivers. And we also have to be clear about what self-care is. I often sit at interdisciplinary tables and talk about self-care, and the message that we are often sending to caregivers is take good care of yourself so that you can what? Take care of them. And that's true. If it's your goal to be someone's primary caregiver, I believe it's your duty to be in shape to provide the care they need. Absolutely. But if the only reason you're taking care of yourself is so that you can take care of someone else, that no longer meets the definition of self-care. That's just another caregiving responsibility. So when we talk about the oxygen mask, when we talk about pouring from an empty pitcher, those things are really helpful to remember and should not be the only reason why we're taking care of ourselves. Over time, if that's the only reason we're taking care of ourselves, we can start to harbor feelings of resentment. Now I gotta go to my darn yoga class so I don't start yelling at him. And the self-care itself seems like a burden. I've had people in classes say, oh, you know, when I give out a self-care homework assignment, one more thing I gotta do. So self-care should be for the primary purpose of enhancing the health and well-being of the caregiver. And a lovely and wonderful secondary benefit of self-care is that the care you provide to the person you love will be better for it. That distinction is really important to make. I had somebody once in a support group slam her fist down on the table and say to me, I don't want to keep taking care of myself just so I can keep taking care of her. And I thought, touche. So respite provides opportunity for self-care. Other support services also provide that opportunity. I want to take care of myself. I've already given myself the permission. I know exactly what I'm going to do, but darn if I can do it. Services like respite can be very helpful toward that end. Can also facilitate improved well-being and reduce negative outcomes. If we're able to give ourselves permission to use those kinds of services, and if we're able to access them. Redwood Caregiver Resource Center has limited grant funding for respite, so they can pay for temporary respite, either in the home or at a day program, a short-term stay in a facility if that's needed overnight. And they also have additional funding through a long-standing partnership with the Parkinson's Association of Northern California. So you can access grants for respite through their federal funding, grants for respite through their state funding, and then additional grants for respite through the PANC funding if you're caring for someone with a Parkinsonian diagnosis. Emotional support, such as support groups, counseling, classes, these can help with cultivating coping strategies in this new context. Often what used to work for me no longer works for me because I was never in this context before. So sometimes we have to, or what used to work for me is no longer practical or possible in this new context. I can't get out to do it, or because of my own aging issues or my own health status, I can't do those things I used to do. If I had a nickel for every person who told me, well, I used to do such and such, I used to do such and such, I'd be rich. So sometimes starting from scratch, what will work now? How can we approximate coping now in this context? And getting some support from groups like this. Sometimes individual counseling can be helpful for that. Classes that teach some of these strategies can be very helpful. Can help provide validation for complicated and often conflicting emotions. You can learn that you're not the only one who has that thought bubble up. You're not the only one who's felt that before. You're not the one who's afraid, the only one who's afraid of this thing. You're not the only one adjusting to feeling like you're not yourself. Can help reduce feelings of isolation and loneliness. And I think it's important to distinguish the two. You can be in a room full of people and know you're not isolated. Nobody's isolated today. But you can also be in a room full of people and still feel lonely if you're not feeling like you're able to relate to the people around you. So finding support that helps you understand that you're relatable, that allows you to relate to other people, can be really helpful to reduce both feelings of isolation and loneliness. Whoops. It's like you have Lucille Ball presenting today. There we go. And then again, can assist with realistic expectations and planning. Especially, I'm sure those of you who've been to these meetings before, if this is not your first meeting, you've probably heard from other people, well, yeah, we heard about that and we tried it, but it didn't work for us. Or that worked for a little while and then. Or, you know, when you go to Kaiser and you're in line at the pharmacy, try to go to Betty on the end and not Joe on the left. Some of these practical things, right? So realistic expectations and planning can also help with reminding you of what's realistic to expect of yourselves. You know, somebody else might catch you beating yourself up about something and might say, hey, that doesn't sound fair. Or sounds to me like you're doing everything you could possibly do and the disease marches on, and that's where the grief is. And that's no fault of yours. When we don't get that perspective, when we don't get feedback from other people, sometimes we can conclude that our automatic feelings are the truth. And sometimes they are, a lot of times they're not. Assistance with the goal of preserving the health and well-being of the caregiver as a human being. I talked a little bit earlier about this focus on self-care for this purpose, primarily. Caregivers' needs must be prioritized in light of the risk. I mentioned earlier that caregivers are at increased risk for developing anxiety, depression, physical health issues, having any of those that were pre-existing exacerbate under the stress of caregiving. We also know statistically that caregivers often have worse health status indicators over time than the person for whom they're providing care, if they don't purpose to keep on top of their own health, if they don't have access to do that and permission to do that. So in light of these risks, we really do need to prioritize caregiver health and well-being. I kind of think of caregiving as a silent public health epidemic. Caregivers deserve services aimed at addressing their unique needs, separate from the needs of care recipients. Not more than. This is not a, I'm not, you know, trying to set up a competition here, who deserves it more. I'm saying caregivers' needs need to be brought from here to here. Everybody's needs are important. Everybody's needs are valid. And everybody's at risk without adequate support. Sometimes, you know, I've been working in the community, and sometimes I'll hear from certain organizations or programs, oh, well, we take care of everybody. And I'll say, oh, whose name is on the file? Who do you bill? That's your patient, that's your client. It's good that there are holistic programs that take care of everybody, but if the only care that a caregiver is giving is from their loved one's doctor saying, how are you? That's not adequate. The loved one's doctor saying, how are you, and then referring them to their own specific help and care is what's indicated, so that they have support that's addressing their unique needs in the context of the caregiving. Does that make sense? Again, not more important, but as important. So in conclusion, without adequate support, the health and well-being of family caregivers are a great risk. Family caregivers are managing emotional, mental, physical, financial, and logistical stressors related to caregiving. Family caregivers also juggle other responsibilities and obligations in addition to caregiving. The rest of the world doesn't slow down. Caring for a loved one who's simultaneously here and not here, that's that ambiguous loss I mentioned before. This is my relationship and not quite. Themselves and not themselves, myself and not myself. That ambiguity is really tough. This is a unique challenge of dementia caregiving, and I know not everybody with Parkinson's has dementia, but as cognitive changes happen, if they happen, this ambiguity is even more pronounced. Family caregivers deserve to have their needs prioritized and addressed. Self-care is not selfishness. It's a self-sustaining survival need. Anybody who's worried about whether or not their self-care is selfish is likely not selfish because of the fact that they're worried about that. Selfish people aren't considering that. There are resources available in your community to support you with managing the stresses of caregiving. And I've mentioned Redwood Caregiver Resource Center many times. I have lots of their information in the back, fact sheets on caregiving and ambiguous laws, fact sheets on caregiver health. I've got a list of the classes that I teach for them. Each month, I teach a different class on rotating topics related to caregiving, dementias, different issues that come up related to caring for someone with a chronic degenerative illness. You're already aware of this group. I think sending you to the Caregiver Resource Center, they're free of charge, they're funded through the State Department of Aging, is really a good place to start. If you haven't met with a family consultant to have that comprehensive assessment and action plan put together for you, I can't recommend it enough. That will help kind of narrow things down so that you don't feel like you're stabbing in the dark trying to go through the senior resource guide and guess which number you should be calling for help. They can meet with you and help organize that and point you in the direction of resources that best match the needs that you've expressed. If you're already connected to them and you haven't heard from them in a long time, know that that's their model, because their client is the caregiver. They are client activated and client directed. So don't hesitate to call and say, hey, it's been a long time since I've talked to my family consultant. Some things are changing, or the water's feeling hotter. Can we schedule a call to touch base again and kind of reassess where we are now? They're happy to do that. That's part of the deal for them. So there's information here. California's Caregiver Resource Centers can be really helpful. Wherever you live in California, there's a Caregiver Resource Center that can provide support. I think this statewide website can be helpful because they have a blog, they have videos, they have the statewide calendar. So I brought the calendar of classes that gets mailed out quarterly from Redwood Caregiver Resource Center if you are on their mailing list for the classes that I teach each month, and those are on Zoom. But there's a statewide calendar. Since COVID, one of the good things that's come out of that, not too many good things, but one of the good things that's come out of that is that we've pivoted to offering more things remotely. And so now you can take a class from the Los Angeles Caregiver Resource Center if they have something on a topic you're interested in. I sometimes have people from San Diego in the classes I'm teaching. So this statewide website can be really helpful to access more resources and support. And then Redwood Caregiver Resource Center, the www.redwoodcrc.org is the website to the local Caregiver Resource Center that covers Sonoma County. They provide respite grants, support groups, counseling, classes, ongoing consultation and support. They have counseling in-house, and they also have counseling with licensed therapists in the community. I contract with them to do a couple of their support groups. I also contract with them to teach the classes I mentioned, and I contract with them to do short-term counseling, so they can pay for up to 6 sessions of counseling. And that's at a very, very minimal, they would assess a suggested donation copay for you. Some people pay $20 a session, some people pay $5 a session, some people don't pay anything at all. So they would look at what realistically could work for you. They would send me a voucher, and I would bill them directly for those 6 sessions. So if that's something that you think could be helpful, be aware of that. Their information is in the back. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come and talk today. I know that this is a topic that is, not sunny. There's some really, really hard truths related to the stress of caregiving. And I know it's hard to hear, hard to talk about, and really does deserve our attention. I think you caregivers out in the room deserve this acknowledgement. And so I thank you all for being here. This is just the tip of the iceberg here, but I hope it was a little more validating for you and provided some good information. I'm happy to answer some questions. We got about 10 minutes. If anybody has any questions or comments. Yes.
You talked a lot about support for the caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how those of us with Parkinson's, how we can support our caregivers?
I love that question. Thank you. I think just being aware as you are, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, but in my experience, being aware as you are that the person helping you is under increased stress. There are things that you can and can't do about that, but I think to the degree that you understand it when it occurs to you, acknowledgement goes a long, long way. I understand this is really difficult for you. I understand you're putting a lot on hold to help me, and I appreciate it. I see you, I hear you, and I appreciate it. I think that is probably the most important thing that a person can do. And sometimes people are helping in ways we're not even aware of. So when it occurs to you that you want to be supportive, I think that acknowledgement, and ask, is there anything I can do to help relieve your burden? Is there anything I can do to help ease some of your stress? Sometimes the answer will be no, because sometimes there's not anything you can do. The acknowledgement is huge. I see you. Most people on the planet want to be seen and heard and cared about. Is that helpful?
Anybody else?
Yeah, and if you're a person being taken care of, don't feel guilty.
Right. This is nobody's fault. And so the purpose of this talk is not to make anybody feel guilty. This is a really tough topic. And I'm hopeful that it can create the opportunity for a little bit of understanding and some connection. The degree to which that's possible for each family here is going to be different.
I just want to thank you for one little gem that you that you put out there, and that was about taking care of yourself means more than just to the level of where I can take care of my wife. It's beyond that to take care of myself.
Absolutely.
And that was such a valuable piece. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I'm glad that was helpful. I'm glad that was helpful.
All right.
Thank you. I'd like to take advantage of asking a question, a very specific question, since I have this group at hand. Not much to do with your talk, but I have a specific problem that I've been having. My wife, besides Parkinson's, has Lewy body. And a dentist, trying to get her dental care. I've gone through Kaiser, and they gave me a referral for Kaiser, but that Kaiser doctor, the dentist, took the x-rays, difficult, because with the Parkinson's and dementia person, they don't, when they say open wide, you know, it takes time to open wide, or turn your head this way. It doesn't happen automatically.
Yeah.
And the dentist, in looking and saying, well, if I'm going to do any procedures with her, you might want to go to a specific person that can work, you know, keep your mouth open that long, be still. She gets so distracted so easily.
Yeah.
I'm having a real hard time finding a dentist. That's my question.
Got anybody?
Anybody?
Anybody had any luck with a dentist that's helpful?
You may want to check and see if you can find a dentist who specializes in geriatrics. They are out there. Check with the California Dental Association.
Were you gonna comment?
I have one comment, and that's my husband needed a root canal done recently, and he can hold still and he doesn't have a problem. But I asked them, what happens when a person cannot get in here? And the endodontist said, I don't understand your question, but basically, you're out of luck if you can't get them in, as far as root canals and stuff. And then what happens?
Right.
They're in visible pain and et cetera. They don't have an answer. But I did ask it.
I can think of one thing is that we had a program called Parkinson's Aware for healthcare professionals. And make sure that dentists are on the mailing list for that.
A really good point. Yeah. A really good point. And I think making sure before you go, maybe I need to reserve a longer appointment time. Have them be aware of that realistically ahead of time. Yeah, this is across the board as people become more functionally impaired, either physically and they can't get to the dentist, and there's not a lot of dentists doing house calls, or cognitively, they can't understand or comply quickly with the directions. And sometimes people with dementia, it's not even an issue of the speed of response time. It's more, you're giving me all this inundating information and it's making me more anxious, and then I might get combative or resistant and self-protective because it feels scary. And so sometimes looking at what might be available in terms of medications to help during those kinds of appointments. Working closely with the doctor, what could we possibly, I know a lot of people across the board have to take medication because of the anxiety of going to a dentist. Sometimes medications like that, if indicated, if they're not going to be contraindicated with other medications or have, adverse side effects. And I know that's a big concern with Parkinson's. So working with the doctor, what might be safe to give her for an appointment like this so that she can tolerate the stress. There might be some kind of a sedation dentistry sort of option. I'm not recommending that, but I am recommending exploring whether or not that might be a possibility.
Hi.
Hi.
Basically the same question, but for ophthalmology.
Mhm.
My husband needs a couple of different things, and he can't sit still because of the dyskinesia. Keeps going. So I don't know if anybody knows someone that they've dealt with for their partner.
Anybody know anybody in the ophthalmology field?
In the back of the room?
Yeah, I know somebody at Kaiser, so she can just talk to me afterward.
Great.
You guys
Great.
know each other.
Great.
That's cool. Talk to me.
While the microphone's going around, I'm just aware of the elephant in the room is, again, the grief, that there's not a good solution for so many of these issues that come on.
Hi there. Sad reflection that we have mobile veterinary clinics, but apparently we don't have them for people. Anyway,
Yes,
that wasn't my
agreed,
question.
Agreed.
I'm looking for 24-hour respite care. I'd like to take a week off to go overseas. And when I call around to Redwood and so on, the conversation goes really well until they realize it's for 24 hours and then the conversation dries up. So do I just find a nice hotel that has meal service to the room and book that for a week? I don't know where to turn.
Well, I wouldn't recommend a hotel, but I think if you're talking about calling Redwood for a respite grant, they're probably telling you we have limited grants, right? Because they're funded through the state or they have some federal funding. Even the PANC funding is limited. It's meant to give you some breaks to get your head above water. It probably wouldn't pay for 24 hours for a week, but it could probably contribute to the cost. I'm guessing they're telling you would be responsible for paying for the difference, which is prohibitive for a lot of people. The cost of care, that's one of those financial stressors I mentioned. The cost of care is very expensive, especially when we want skilled, reliable care. If you're going overseas, you want to be able to have your body and your mind there, not your body there and your mind back at home wondering if everything's okay. So unfortunately, this is one of those areas where, even with respite grants, even with help, it doesn't always cover the whole need. This is a systemic problem. Yeah, I'm sorry that that's something that's not been possible for you. I think maybe talking with a family consultant more about what other options might be around. Sometimes people cobble different resources together. So there might be something they're aware of that you could access to cobble together with their grant. But yeah, their grants are kind of more meant as Gatorade on the path to kind of get your head above water a little bit. Unfortunately, because of funding, there's not unlimited respite, and there ought to be.
Yeah, I want to add. I had an experience with that about 3 years ago, and we got a $3,500 grant, and I was able to put my wife in a facility. I didn't like the facility, but afterwards, but the fact is, we got $3,500 towards it, which was significant.
I want to thank you for your service today. I just want to say I practice traditional Chinese medicine, and I do Qigong every day. And in China, Taiwan and China itself have hospitals that have been dealing with Parkinson's for thousands of years. And to the gentleman that had just asked, possibly he could get something there, because they really have a lot to say. They used to call it the shakes.
Uh-huh.
And I've been practicing Qigong for several years.
Uh-huh.
And it has done a wonderful thing for my Parkinson's.
Great.
And I also wanted to say thank you so much, because my wife only has one eye and I have the shakes. And we go together because I have to be on one side and she has to slow down.
Yeah. You're partners, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you, Bram. We have time for one more.
All right.
I wondered if you have any resources out of state, but within the United States?
Uh-huh. So for caregivers, the California Caregiver Resource Center, as I said, has been around since 1984, providing services to family caregivers. And they've actually served as a model for national funding. In 2000, Title III-E of the Older Americans Act went into effect, and that's the National Family Caregiver Support Program. And that money, the funds for those programs come from the Federal Department on Aging to the state departments on aging, and then go to the local area agencies on aging. So wherever this person lives, they should contact their area agency on aging and ask what family caregiver support program services exist in their area. They're not uniform. There's not a requirement that each area agency on aging provide uniform services with those funds. So they might not look like what we've got here, but there should be something. Uh-huh.
I also just want to put in a plug for the Davis Finney Foundation. They have caregiver groups once a month. It's not really a group, it's more of a discussion of information, and I'm no longer a caregiver, but I still go because they're really important and powerful. So I recommend that. Davis Finney, P-H-I-N-N-E-Y. And Alexis, thank you so much. That was really a wonderful, wonderful talk.